Hi and welcome to a new episode of ThinLinc animated series. Today I have my colleague Aaron Sowry with me and we are going to talk to you about ThinLinc cluster administration. Hi Aaron, how are you doing today?
Hi Adnan, hope you're well.
I would like to ask you Aaron, what is the difference between single server configuration and cluster configuration in ThinLinc?
ThinLinc on the server side has two main components, the master and the agent. And the master can be thought of as a session broker. Its job is to handle authentication, keep track of the sessions, to manage session creation and so forth. Whereas the agent's job is actually to create the sessions themselves and to maintain, keep the sessions running essentially. Now in its simplest configuration, both of these components, the master and the agent, are installed on the same server. But for installations which need to handle a large number of users, it's often desirable to have these two main processes separated and have them on separate servers. And this is called a cluster configuration. In a typical cluster configuration, you'll have the master on its own dedicated server, virtual server or physical server, it doesn't matter. And behind it, you'll have several agent servers running. As I mentioned before, the master handles authentication and keeps track of the sessions, whereas the agent servers run the actual sessions themselves and therefore do the vast majority of the work. There are a few advantages to configuring ThinLinc in this way. That is to say, configuring a cluster rather than having everything on a single server. One advantage is you get a certain degree of redundancy and fault tolerance by doing so. So for example, if one of the agent servers goes down for any reason, be it a fault or be it taken down for maintenance intentionally, you still have other agents in the cluster which are able to take up the slack and keep the service running, and you get a certain degree of continuity in that respect. Another reason is load balancing. So the ThinLinc master will actually balance sessions as they're created over several agents, if several agents are available. And that ends up providing a better end user experience, because if one of the agents is particularly heavily loaded for any reason, you generally don't want to be creating new sessions on it when a user connects. Okay, it's better to use one of the agents which isn't as heavily loaded, and the ThinLinc master will do that automatically when multiple agents are available to it. Another reason for running in a cluster configuration is scalability. It's rather trivial to add and remove agents to and from the cluster as required. So if you require more capacity, it's easy to add another agent to the cluster, and if you have too much capacity, it's equally as easy to remove one of the agents from the cluster as well. But for this reason, all agents in the cluster should be identical. When a user connects, because of the load balancing feature in ThinLinc, they could end up on any one of the multiple agent servers that are available. And if they're all identical, then it really doesn't matter which one.
Okay, thanks Aaron. I would like to ask you, are there any disadvantages for having a cluster configuration?
Well, one disadvantage is that you need to deal with multiple servers in a cluster configuration instead of just one. This is unavoidable, obviously, but it does increase the administrative load somewhat. But luckily, ThinLinc ships with a number of tools to assist with this. One of these is called TL-rsync all. And this is a tool which is basically just a wrapper around the well-known command line tool rsync. And it's very helpful when you want to make a configuration change on one of the agents and then push that configuration change out to all of the agents in the cluster. It will actually sync any file or directory that you give it, but its main use is for propagating configuration changes throughout the cluster. That means you only have to make configuration changes in one place rather than logging into each machine in the cluster and making the same change multiple times. Another example of a tool is TL/SSH all, and this is very similar to TL/rsync all, except TL/SSH all will run any command that you give it on every agent in the cluster. And this is very helpful for general administrative tasks, for example, performing system updates on every machine in the cluster.
What about best practice administration? Could you talk to us a little bit about that, please?
Well, one approach to administering a ThinLinc cluster is described briefly in the ThinLinc administration guide in section 14.1.2. And there it describes a method of using the master as a sandbox for testing configuration changes before pushing them out to every agent in the cluster. It's worth having a read through if you plan on installing a ThinLinc cluster, but the short version is that you turn the master machine into an agent which only accepts connections from administrative users. These administrative users can then create a sandbox session on the master, make the changes, test those changes before pushing those changes out using TL/rsync all or TL/SSH all to the rest of the agents in the cluster. And this is simply a good way of making sure that your changes aren't going to break things for the users on your system. And is basically an example of best practice administration for a ThinLinc cluster.
Okay, thank you, Aaron, and thanks to all of you watching us today. We will be back soon with more episodes from ThinLinc animated series. Bye-bye.